So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again today. Thank you, Brian, for speaking. It's great to have you. So Brian Kennedy is entering his 40th year in the staffing industry. He started running a full cycle desk in the 80s, then managing multi-million-dollar staffing firms for others in the 90s, to launching, growing, and managing third-party staffing companies with revenues as high as 40 million in the 2000s. Brian's staffing experience includes IT, engineering, sales and marketing, accounting and finance, administrative, and supply chain management. Light industrial, healthcare, and PEOs have been added to his skill set since moving to the M&A world. He also serves on an advisory board for HR tech company in the US, which helps him to keep abreast of the state of digital transformation in the staffing industry. Thank you again for speaking today, Brian. Good luck with your presentation.
Thanks very much, Alex, and thanks to you and Mark and the team at Toronto Jobs for putting this together. I see a few people on the call or on the presentation that know me. So those that know me know I like to talk, and we've only got 30 minutes and a lot of ground to cover. So I'm just going to jump right in and probably skip over the surface a little bit. There certainly is an opportunity to get into a lot more detail, and I can be available for anybody that wants to extend the discussions beyond this half-hour session today. So we're really just going to be talking about buying and selling staffing companies in 2021 as it relates to the state of the M&A marketplace in the staffing industry. And we're going to talk about 2021 valuations, the multiples that we're currently seeing in the marketplace. And when I say we, let me just give a quick bit of background. R.A. Cohen is a company of two people, myself and Sam Sacco. Sam's down in Wilmington, North Carolina. We are primarily a sell-side M&A advisory. Completely focused on the staffing industry and have been since 1991. And since 91, we've closed about 181 transactions. There's not a lot that we know about outside of staffing, and we're still learning a lot about staffing every day in a marketplace that's constantly changing and forcing us all to adapt and learn new methods and whatnot. But there are certain principles pertaining to M&A that remain constant regardless of the marketplace. Let's see if we can jump into a few of those. So when we talk about the marketplace, it's actually pretty huge. Conventional staffing in North America represents 150 to 165 billion or so, depending on who you ask, in total revenue. But that doesn't include the gig economy. It doesn't include talent management platforms and the freelance economy through tools like Fiverr and Upwork and whatnot. And then there's the PEO piece. So there are some estimates out there that would suggest that the staffing industry as a whole might be close to about $450 billion in North America if we include all those other buckets. But for the purposes of our discussion today, we're really going to focus on the market as it relates to traditional or conventional staffing companies that you can see listed over on the left-hand side. And you can see on the right-hand side just a little bit of a history as to the number of transactions that were actually reported in 2020. And it's down slightly from 2019. COVID certainly had an impact. We'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. But these are only the disclosed transactions. There are probably dozens, possibly even 100 or more transactions that would have closed that really nobody ever heard about, either because they're very small or because they're acquisitions that are being done very discreetly and not something that the new owner or the outgoing seller has necessarily wanted to broadcast out to the marketplace. So you can see in 2020, according to staffing industry analysts, a great resource, by the way, that there were 135 reported transactions in North America in 2020, down from 219 or 209 in 2019. And if you have some questions, please feel free to put them in the chat session. We'll try and leave some room at the end to address as many of them as possible. So who were the buyers in 2020? Well, pretty much the same buyers that we saw, although we did see some shifting, pretty much the same buyers that we saw in 2019. Strategic buyers, those are companies already in the staffing industry looking to expand either their geographical or their capability footprint in the existing marketplace. Private equity and family offices have been very busy in our space really for about the last 5 or 6 years. We've seen that continue to increase, and in fact, when I first got into the M&A world about 9 years ago now, Private equity and family office buyers were typically looking for firms with at least a couple of $1 million of profit. That bar has lowered significantly as the appetites increased significantly to get into this business services segment that has the beautiful thing of recurring monthly revenue. So we're seeing now private equity and family offices interested very often in companies that are producing $750,000 in profit and up. So significant change over the course of the last 7, 8, 9 years for sure. I think the most interesting addition to this list we first started to see in 2019 were talent technology companies, HR platforms, talent management platforms. They go by a myriad of monikers or descriptions, but these are companies who really have products that, first of all, could be acquired and harnessed by people in the staffing industry already. But a lot of these vendors have realized that maybe one of the best ways to not only get a proof of concept as far as their technology is concerned, but also fortify themselves as they go out for the inevitable rounds of financing that seem to exist in the technology world. A lot of these firms are starting to realize, hey, maybe we should start acquiring staffing companies so that we can have candidates and clients ready-made who will automatically adopt the system or adopt the technology. So we're starting to see this pretty significant impact from those companies coming in as well. And, you know, we even have I noticed the other day, Entrepreneur Media, the publishers of Entrepreneur Magazine, have come out with a talent management platform called Entrepreneur Next. And it's a freelancer platform, mostly for white-collar freelancers who are looking to find engagements or contracts, be they short-term or long-term, and for buyers or consumers of those services, typically companies of all sizes who are looking to get short-term work or even longer-term projects addressed. So as we go on, you know, we have to take a look at what the impact of COVID-19 was on M&A. Certainly, you saw on that second slide, there was a nominal impact in terms of volume. Sam and I, what we experienced was actually our busiest year ever as 2020 came to a close. We were fortunate enough to close more transactions in 2020 than we've closed in any other year, at least as far as the value of those transactions are concerned. So there were some segments in staffing that were immune, and actually some that even prospered. Others were negatively impacted. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what they were. Immune or on the prospering side, healthcare, IT, pharma and life sciences, and light industrial, certainly as it relates to supply chain. Negatively impacted, though, staffing companies involved in hospitality, anything to do with travel, office admin, legal, and direct hire or perm in general certainly was a lot softer for many, as is often the case when there's an economic downturn. Perm is the first to go and often the last to come back. With that being said, certainly we also saw some impact on valuations and deal structures. While we had a surge of buyers at the beginning of COVID who were getting in touch with us on the hope that there'd be a bunch of desperate sellers out there, we did see certainly not only an increase in the volume of number of people looking to buy, but we also saw a certain percentage of those looking to get a better deal. That being said, you know, overall, the North American economy for the last few years has really fostered a strong M&A climate, due in large part to the cheap money that's available. So it's, you know, it's certainly something that we've seen. What really did change for us, and most of the sellers that we worked with in 2020 were not prepared to go into a fire sale. They weren't desperate. They weren't looking to run out the door. They were prepared to hold on for a pre-COVID valuation, if you will. And for those that did, they certainly saw a change in deal structures. Less cash at closing than we would have seen in 2019 on average, and certainly more of the target price being subordinated to an earnout. Even in the situations where the company didn't deserve necessarily, the seller didn't deserve an earnout for any of the traditional reasons, Just the fact that it was a convenient opportunity for buyers to say, hey, I can't predict what the future is going to be, therefore you need to share some risk with me, Mr. or Ms. Seller, and therefore we're going to put a chunk of this into an earnout, and in some cases, a very large chunk of that into an earnout type of structure. So overall, I would say COVID-19 certainly has stimulated the market, and there are and continue to be really great opportunities and a lot of activity for people that are looking to make this move. But do keep in mind, you're probably going to see different deal structures than what you would have seen pre-COVID. So let's touch quickly, and all of this is going to be quickly and hopefully leave some room at the end for some Q&A if there is any, but valuations in 2021. First of all, valuations in our industry are typically multiples of adjusted EBITDA, or that's what a valuation ultimately produces. Adjusted EBITDA is basically your net earnings, or earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, plus or minus any adjustments that might be made to that EBITDA to normalize it for a prospective buyer. So what qualifies as an adjustment? Certainly things that get added back, or added back to profit to increase profit and therefore increase the transaction value, would be one-time expenses. Maybe you had a legal expense in 2019 that was a one-time expense that you incurred to set up a family office trust or to settle a lawsuit. Maybe you had a particular insurance claim that you wanted to settle, or something along those lines. Expenses that were incurred that are not expected to reoccur, or that are not required in order for the business to be sustained at its current trajectory, almost always will factor into additions to EBITDA. There can be also expenses that revolve around the owner or the seller themselves. It's not unusual to see sellers running their boat insurance through the office supplies account and whatnot. And in terms of determining those adjustments, you know, we need to take a case-by-case look at each situation, because no two situations in a valuation are ever exactly the same. Some owners may take the majority of the money that they receive from their firm in the form of distributions from their balance sheet. Others may take it as income. We need to take a look at those items that went through the profit and loss or through the income statement and determine, based on what it is the owner does in the business and how intrinsic they are to the business, we have to determine if the monies that they received for doing that work were in step with the market. If they were overpaid as compared to the marketplace, there certainly could be a positive or an additional amount of money that's added to EBITDA. But as often is the case, particularly where the owner is involved in the business, where the business depends on that person to be there, and that owner eventually wants to exit, we've got to be able to account for a new owner, that person's going to need to be replaced, and they're going to need to be replaced at market value. So if an owner's only pulling $40,000 off the income statement, but they're doing a job that's heavily oriented towards sales, managing the organization, overseeing service delivery, then obviously it's a pretty key role, and that person's going to need to be replaced at a rate higher than $40,000. So in some cases, adjustments can actually detract or reduce EBITDA by a certain amount. And EBITDA is always a pretty subjective item when it comes to buyers, and it's probably one of the most negotiated issues in the early stages of any transaction. We work with our sellers to take a realistic view of what's happening in the market. We try and stay abreast of what market rates are like for different senior functions within the firm that owners might be performing, and we make those adjustments accordingly. But do be prepared to work on the adjustments to your EBITDA to determine what your actual value would be in the marketplace. So valuation criteria are the same in 2021 as they were in 2019. We'll add a 10th one here, which is not on the screen at the end, but you can see sales volume, obviously profitability and growth rates, gross margin quality, which varies from segment to segment. One would expect your margins to be higher in accounting and finance or healthcare than they might be in light industrial or IT, even for that matter. Understanding what your management depth is and how capable your business is of running without you there matters a great deal in evaluation, certainly as far as buyers are concerned. A diverse, long-term, and stable customer base is always a big item, diverse being the real key there. If you have concentration, or in other words, if one of your customers or more represents, well, if one of your customers represents 25% of your revenue or more, that is a concentration issue. Again, that's going to drive a different deal structure, more oriented towards an earnout. There's also then the look at your marketplace, whether you're healthcare, IT, office admin, hospitality. Is it a major market? Is it a growing market? What kind of shape is that in? And then what is your position within that market? How good is your reputation? A lot of this stuff is soft, a little hard to calculate, can be certainly very subjective, but these are all factors that are taken into consideration. Contract and temp staffing nets a much higher yield as far as valuation multiples are concerned than does perm and search. And in fact, if perm or search revenue represents really more than 10 or 15% of your revenue, again, we start to get into some complications as far as deal structures are concerned. Again, more earnouts, but we also start to see a dilution of the multiples that we would apply to a more contract or temp-centric firm. At perm firms, while they are marketable, they do transact at substantially lower multiples. Clean insurance records, safety records, legal history, record keeping, all of the stuff that is hard for many of us to do when we're busy smiling and dialing and making placements, but it is a key component in an acquisition. The bigger you are, the more important that becomes. And depending on what market you're in, particularly light industrial, that workers' comp or that insurance record and the kind of coverage that you have, even the kind of proactive programs that you put into place for safety and preventative training and whatnot, that matters a lot. And then geography and locations, multiple offices certainly do factor in, maybe not as much as they did in 2019, because we live in a much more remote world now that everybody's been working from home. I think the number 10 item that we have to include here too is the undeniable impact that technology is having on the marketplace. Now, while a lot of buyers, particularly strategic buyers, come with their own tech stack already in place, there are a lot of first-time buyers out there who are looking for platform companies that they can drop other firms onto, or that they can grow organically from. Having a great tech stack, more than just an ATS these days, becomes actually pretty important. And I think you'll start to see the state of a company's tech stack have a more significant impact on valuations as time goes by. So let's take a look at really probably what most people on the call are really wanting to know, and that's where are the multiples today. Again, this is remembering that we're talking about multiples of adjusted EBITDA, not your unadjusted EBITDA. And then you can see that there are some differences based on scale in terms of revenue here, and then you can see the delineation or the differentiation as it relates to the primary different markets, at least that we find ourselves working in. Now, please keep in mind, and some of you might be trying to jot these numbers down really fast, this can all be available to you. More on that later, but if you want to get a copy of this, I'm sure we can arrange to get that done. Also, please understand that these multiples here do not include the net value of your balance sheet. Sometimes in a transaction, the balance sheet is taken by the seller in its entirety. They get the cash, they get the AR that's generated up until close, they're responsible for payables and liabilities, and off they go. There are many transactions, though, where the seller is required to leave some working capital in the business, a portion of, or potentially even all of that AR. In those cases, we would expect a buyer to pay for that working capital on a dollar-for-dollar basis. So multiples in general are going to be higher than what you're seeing here based on the health of your balance sheet. The better your balance sheet, the better return you're going to get on your transaction overall. And certainly companies under $5 million, that's a whole other category that we didn't get into. There is a marketplace for those companies. It's not as big. We're one of the few advisory firms that will actually work with companies under $10 million in revenue. So if you do have a firm that's under 5 and you're wanting to at least understand where you sit in the marketplace, again, that's something that you can follow up with us on individually. Okay, I'm not sure how much time we've got left here. Hang on for a second. We have about 9 minutes left. So let's, there's a bunch of additional questions and discussion points that, you know, we're not going to really get a chance to dig into here today. We could easily, well, those who know me know I could easily talk for a couple of hours on this stuff. But should I sell or buy assets, or should I sell or buy stock in a company? What happens to the balance sheet? We just touched on that a moment ago. What if my company is losing money? What if it's a negative EBITDA? Can I still sell it? What are the best earnout structures? What's the sales cycle when I sell my company, and how long does it take? How do you deal with change in control and client reassignment issues in a transaction? As far as legal involvement, getting attorneys and lawyers involved, you know, how much involvement do they have? How much does it cost? And at what stage in the process do they become involved? And to that end, understanding the whole aspect of reps and warranties in a transaction is also important. There's really too many other questions to list in the time that we have. So certainly, I would leave you with this, and if there's some Q&A, we can certainly try and jump into that. But start planning your exit now. Even if you're not thinking of selling your company for another 5 years, it's good to start with an end in mind. Establish those goals, establish some timeline for your exit, and get a sense of where you stand right now in terms of how marketable is your company right now and what is it worth. We have a report card that I'm happy to send to anybody that requests it that will allow you to grade yourself and your firm in terms of the multiples that you saw earlier. And then you can validate those findings through a guided and confidential no-cost valuation from us. That's been something that we've been doing since 1991. We spend hundreds of hours a year giving these confidential and complimentary valuations, honestly, in the interest of building some relationships with people, so that inevitably, when they do come to a point when they're ready to sell, we're a company that they're going to think of and give us an opportunity to work with them. Part of that process as well, you know, because we have an opportunity to see so many companies in the marketplace and people doing things so many different ways and utilizing technology to different extents, there are opportunities for us to comment back on your individual valuation as to what some of the low-hanging fruit might be that will help you to drive short or mid-term shareholder value, or bottom line, to increase the value of your organization. So I would welcome anybody that's here to get in touch with me. You can check out our website. We've got a bunch of resources there. Give me a call, send me an email, send me a LinkedIn invite, and we can keep the conversation going. So with that being said, are there any questions that people have that maybe they'd like to put up into the chat section?
Hi again, Brian. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Alex.
Yeah, so I just wanted to come back on. There is actually a question here. I'll just be sort of moderating the chat if there is any other questions after, but there is a question here from Jesse Ryan. So he asks, or she, sorry, how relevant are multiple offices in 2021 as opposed to pre-COVID?
Which are multiples?
Repeat that. How relevant are multiple offices in 2021 as opposed to pre-COVID?
That's a good question, Jesse, and hi, I haven't talked to you in a while. I hope you're keeping well. Certainly, you know, it does not have the same impact. Prior to COVID, we had a lot of difficulty getting buyers to embrace the work from home concept. We've had some sellers that have used that model extensively, and it was a very polarizing issue. Less so now, but understanding marketplaces and having a local presence certainly is important, and I think it still is a factor, maybe somewhat less than what we saw pre-COVID, but interestingly enough, even though we work now in a world where work from home is normal, geography and number of offices still matters to quite a large number of buyers.
Okay, great. So I don't see any other questions here. Oh, Jesse says thanks. And there's another person here, Susan Candelak, and apologies if I pronounced your last name wrong. She says, thank you, Brian. Great snapshot.
You're welcome, Susan.
So I know you've listed, some of your contact information there. Is there maybe you want to put your LinkedIn in the chat, perhaps, or is there any other ways that people can get in touch with you directly?
Sure. I'll just I'll put my phone number here. It's on the slides.
Mm-hmm.
My email address.
Okay, great. And just to let everyone know, so our next session, or actually it's our panel, starts at 3 o'clock. So there's about 6 minutes left, or sorry, 3:30. So there's about 6 minutes left until that. If there's no other questions, I just wanted to say thank you, Brian, for your presentation. It was really interesting, really enjoyable. And thanks again for speaking. It was great to have you today.
Thanks very much, Alex, and thanks everybody for your patience and forbearance.
Thank you again. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.